It was a quiet Tuesday evening in our Boston suburb. The kids, Lily and Jacob, were already upstairs doing their thing. Lily chatting with friends on FaceTime, Jacob engrossed in some new video game. Clara, my wife of 17 years, and I sat in the living room. The glow from the fireplace gave everything a soft, cozy feel, a stark contrast to the icy storm about to descend. "I want to talk to you about something," Clara said, setting down her wine glass. Her tone was calm, her expression unreadable. I looked up from my book, surprised. "Sure, what's on your mind?" She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and clasped her hands together. "This might be a little unconventional, but I've been doing some thinking about our relationship." Now she had my full attention. "Okay," I said cautiously. "We've been together for a long time," she continued, her voice steady but softer than usual. "And I think we've built something beautiful. But lately I feel like there's something missing." I blinked, confused. "Something missing? Like what?" "It's not about love," Clara clarified quickly, reaching over to touch my hand. "I love you, Alan. It hasn't changed. But I think we've become too comfortable. Like roommates more than partners." Her words stung, but I stayed quiet, waiting for her to finish. "I've been reading and listening to podcasts," she went on. "There are couples out there who've managed to keep their relationships fresh by being open to exploring things with other people." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. "Wait, are you saying what I think you're saying?" She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I'm talking about opening our marriage. Giving ourselves the freedom to explore connections with others while still maintaining what we have." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "Clara, this is a lot to take in." "I know," she admitted, "and I don't expect you to give me an answer right away. I want to be honest about how I've been feeling, about what I think could help us grow." I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark street below. My mind raced, every possible scenario flashing before my eyes. Finally, I turned back to her. "Have you already started exploring this idea?" Her eyes darted away for a second, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "No," she said firmly. "I haven't. I wanted to talk to you first, to make this a decision we both agree on." The room felt impossibly small, the air too thick to breathe. "Clara, I don't know what to say. This isn't exactly the kind of thing you just spring on someone." "I understand," she said softly, "and I'm sorry if this feels sudden, but I've been thinking about it for a long time, Alan. I need you to at least consider it." I nodded, more to myself than to her. "I'll think about it," I said, though I had no idea where to even begin. She smiled then, relief evident on her face. "That's all I ask." But as she leaned back into the couch, sipping her wine like it was any other night, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the cracks in our marriage might be deeper than I ever realized. And I wasn't sure they could be repaired. The next few days were a haze. Clara's proposal was like a splinter lodged in my brain. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I walked through life on autopilot, a faint buzzing in my ears every time I replayed her words. I'm talking about opening our marriage. At work, I was useless. My assistant, Mary, kept asking if I was feeling all right. I lied and told her I was tired from a late-night project. At home, Clara seemed as radiant as ever, which only made things worse. She was humming while she cooked, laughing with the kids, and generally acting like she hadn't dropped a bombshell on our marriage. It was Thursday evening when I decided to press the issue. Clara and I were on the couch again, this time watching some forgettable Netflix drama. I muted the TV during a lull and turned to her. "Clara, we need to talk." She looked at me, her smile fading slightly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" This whole open marriage thing, I started struggling to find the right words. I need to understand why now. Why bring it up after all these years? She exhaled slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "I've been thinking about it for a while, Alan, but it became clear to me a few months ago. Do you remember when we went to that barbecue at the Brysons' house?" I frowned, caught off guard by the mention of our neighbors. "Yeah, what about it?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "That night, I felt like we were living in two separate worlds. You spent most of the evening talking to Paul about football or whatever it was. And I had this conversation with Veronica." My stomach twisted at the mention of Veronica Bryson. She was the kind of woman who could command attention without trying. Tall, confident, with a laugh that seemed to linger long after she left the room. "What kind of conversation?" Clara's voice softened, as if she was afraid of how I'd react. She told me about how she and Greg opened their marriage a year ago, how it's completely transformed their relationship. You still here? Stunt. You're basing this on Veronica's advice? It's not advice, she said quickly. It's inspiration. Hearing her talk about it, it made me realize how much I've been holding back. How much we've both been holding back. I ran a hand through my hair, the frustration bubbling up. So what, you think we should just start sleeping with other people and everything will magically get better? That's not what I'm saying, she insisted. It's not about sex, Alan. It's about freedom, about being honest with ourselves and each other. I let out a bitter laugh. Freedom? Honesty? Clara, we've been married for 17 years. If you're not happy, you should have said something a long time ago. I am happy, she said, reaching for my hand. But I want more. Don't you? Her question caught me off guard. Did I? Our life wasn't perfect, sure, but I'd always thought we were solid. Now, for the first time, I found myself questioning everything. Every argument, every moment of silence, every time I caught her glancing at her phone with a faint smile. Is there someone else? I asked suddenly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Clara's eyes widened in surprise. What? No, of course not. Are you sure? I pressed. Because this feels convenient. She pulled her hand back, hurt flashing across her face. Alan, I would never betray you like that. This isn't about anyone else. It's about us. I studied her, trying to gauge if she was telling the truth. If there was one thing Clara had always been good at, it was keeping her emotions in check. I could never tell when she was hiding something. All right, I said finally. If this is really about us, then let's work on our marriage. Just the two of us. No third parties. She nodded, but there was a flicker of something in her expression. Disappointment, maybe? Okay, she said softly. If that's what you want. But as we sat there in the dim light of the living room, the space between us feeling wider than ever, I couldn't shake the sense that Clara wasn't telling me the whole story. And I was determined to find out what she was hiding. The following weekend, the atmosphere in the house was eerily normal, so normal it felt rehearsed. Clara was upbeat, flitting around the house with a serene efficiency that only deepened my unease. If she was disappointed by my rejection of her open marriage idea, she wasn't showing it. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was missing something. Sunday morning, I decided to investigate. Clara had taken Lily to her soccer game, and Jacob was upstairs in his usual gaming trance. The house was quiet, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I started with the basics, her laptop. Clara kept it on the kitchen counter, open but locked. Unfortunately, I didn't know her password. I thought about trying a few guesses, but the risk of her noticing seemed too high. Instead, I moved to her phone, which was charging on the coffee table. To my relief, it wasn't locked. I scrolled through her messages first. Most of them were mundane. Texts with friends about plans, updates from her gym, a group chat with some of the soccer moms. Nothing stood out. But then I opened her email. That's when I found it. The subject line read, our conversation. It was from Veronica Bryson. I hesitated, my heart pounding. The email was short, almost casual, but it sent a chill down my spine. Clara, just checking in to see how things are going with Alan. Remember, these things take time, and it's okay if he's resistant at first. Greg was too. But once we took that leap, it brought us closer than ever. Let me know if you want to grab coffee and talk more. I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. This wasn't just some idle suggestion from Veronica. It was a calculated push. And Clara hadn't mentioned it to me. I wasn't sure what infuriated me more, the email itself or the fact that Clara had hidden it. Dad, Jacob's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I quickly locked the phone and set it back on the table before turning to face him. He stood in the doorway, holding an empty bowl. Can I get more cereal? He asked. Yeah, sure, buddy, I said, forcing a smile. Go ahead. As he disappeared into the kitchen, I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. If Clara was getting advice from Veronica, there was a good chance this whole open marriage idea wasn't as spontaneous as she'd made it seem. But there was something else bothering me. The email mentioned Greg's initial resistance. What had changed his mind? And more importantly, had Clara already made her decision, regardless of what I wanted? That evening, I decided to confront her. When Clara came home from the soccer game, I waited until the kids were in bed. We sat in the living room again, the same place where this all started. I found something today, I said, breaking the silence. Clara raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Your email, I said, watching her reaction closely. The one from Veronica. Her face froze for a split second before she recovered, smiling faintly. You were looking through my email? I was looking for answers, I said bluntly. And I found some. Care to explain? She sighed, sinking back into the couch. Alan, it's not what you think. Veronica was just being supportive. She knows how hard it is to bring up these kinds of conversations. Supportive? I echoed, my voice rising. She's practically coaching you on how to manipulate me into agreeing with this insanity. That's not fair, Clara said, her tone defensive. She's just sharing her experience. And I haven't done anything without talking to you first. Yet, I shot back. You haven't done anything yet. She looked away, her jaw tightening. I don't know why you're making this such a big deal. I thought we could talk about this like adults, but you're acting like I've betrayed you. Have you? I asked, the word sharper than I intended. Clara's head snapped back toward me, her eyes narrowing. No, Alan, I haven't. But if you keep treating me like a criminal, maybe I'll start acting like one. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. I stared at her, trying to decide if she was bluffing or if she really meant it. Either way, one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The tension between Clara and me was palpable over the next week. Our conversations became perfunctory, reduced to logistical updates about the kids or what needed to be done around the house. Every time I looked at her, I replayed her words from that night. Maybe I'll start acting like a criminal. It was Friday night when things escalated. Clara had planned to meet some friends for dinner, and I decided to stay home with the kids. By the time she was ready to leave, she looked more polished than I'd seen her in weeks. Hairstyled, makeup flawless, wearing a dress I didn't even recognize. You look nice, I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Thanks, she replied, not meeting my eyes as she grabbed her purse. Don't wait up. I might be late. Who's going? I asked casually. Just the usual group, she said over her shoulder. Veronica, Melissa, and a couple of the other moms. I nodded, but a part of me didn't believe her. After she left, I paced the house, my gut churning with suspicion. Lily was in her room, headphones on, and Jacob had fallen asleep on the couch. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were deafening. Finally, I decided to do something I'd never done before. Track her. Clara's car had a built-in GPS system that synced with my phone. It wasn't something I used often, but tonight I couldn't resist. I opened the app and waited for it to load. The little dot representing her car pinged on the map, showing her heading downtown. Not toward the restaurant she'd mentioned, but to a boutique hotel near the harbor. My chest tightened as I watched her stop in the parking lot. For a few moments, I just stood there, staring at the screen, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. By the time I arrived at the hotel, my hands were shaking. The parking lot was half full, and I spotted Clara's car near the back, parked neatly under a streetlight. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't just sit at home and let this unfold without answers. Inside, the lobby was sleek and modern, with polished marble floors and minimalist decor. A young receptionist greeted me with a professional smile. Good evening. How can I help you? I'm meeting someone here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A guest. Of course. What's the name? She asked, her fingers poised over the keyboard. Clara Lewis, I said, my heart pounding. The receptionist hesitated for a fraction of a second before smiling again. I'm sorry, but I can't disclose guest information. I understand, I said, forcing a polite tone. Can you at least tell me if there's a private event happening here tonight? She shook her head. No private events, sir. Just regular guests. I nodded, muttering a quick thanks before stepping aside. My mind was racing. If Clara was here, she wasn't meeting Veronica or Melissa. She was meeting someone else. Someone she didn't want me to know about. I waited in the lobby, positioning myself near the elevators where I could see anyone coming or going. About 20 minutes later, the doors opened, and my worst fears were confirmed. Clara stepped out, her cheeks flushed, her hair slightly mussed. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man I didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with an easy smile that made my blood boil. They exchanged a few words, laughing softly, before heading toward the exit. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the air like a whip. Clara, She froze, her eyes wide as she turned to face me. The man beside her looked confused, glancing between us. "Alan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is he?" I demanded, my hands clenched into fists. The man raised his hands defensively. "Hey, calm down. I didn't know." "Save it," I snapped, glaring at Clara. "What the hell is going on?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The man took a step back, muttering something about leaving, and disappeared into the night. For a moment, we just stood there, the tension between us thicker than the humid summer air outside. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice trembling. "Alan, I can explain." "Explain?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've been lying to me for weeks, sneaking around, and now this? Go ahead, Clara. Explain." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sympathy, only anger. "I wasn't lying," she said weakly. "I was trying to figure out how to tell you." "Tell me what?" I demanded. "That you've already decided to explore without me?" She didn't answer, and in that silence, everything between us shattered. We drove home in silence. Clara sat in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, staring out the window. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel. Every nerve in my body coiled like a spring. I wanted to explode, to scream at her, but I forced myself to stay calm, at least until we were behind closed doors. The moment we stepped into the house, Clara broke the silence. "Alan, save it," I snapped, spinning around to face her. "You've been lying to me, sneaking off to hotels, meeting some random guy. Do you think I'm stupid?" Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch. "It's not what you think." "Oh, it's not." I shot back, pacing the room. "So, what is it, Clara? Enlighten me." She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name is Marcus. He's someone I've been talking to." "Talking to?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call it?" Because it didn't look like just talking to me. "It started online," she said quickly, tears streaming down her face. "On a forum about relationships. I was looking for advice, for perspective, and Marcus, he understood me." "Understood you?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean he told you exactly what you wanted to hear? And what? You decided to meet him in person to see if the fantasy held up?" Her head dropped into her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. But it did," I said coldly. "And now I'm here, standing in the ruins of our marriage, trying to figure out who the hell I've been married to all these years." Clara looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Alan. I swear." I laughed again, a bitter, hollow sound. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" "Clara, you didn't just hurt me. You burned down everything we've built together. And for what? Some stranger?" "It wasn't about him," she insisted. "It was about me. About us. About everything we've lost over the years." I stopped pacing, staring at her in disbelief. "So, this is my fault now? Because I didn't notice you were bored or unfulfilled?" "That's not what I'm saying," she said, her voice trembling. "But you have to admit, Alan, we've been drifting apart for years. You bury yourself in work. You barely talk to me anymore. And when you're home, it's like you're not even here." Her words hit me like a gut punch. Part of me knew she was right, but that didn't excuse what she'd done. "So, instead of talking to me, you decided to talk to him?" I said, my voice thick with sarcasm. "That's your solution?" "I didn't know how to talk to you," she cried. "Every time I tried, you shut me down or changed the subject. I felt invisible." "Well, you're certainly visible now," I said bitterly. "Congratulations." Clara flinched, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was her quiet sobbing. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I'll end it. I'll never see him again. Just please don't give up on us." Her words hung in the air, heavy and desperate. I wanted to believe her, but the image of her and Marcus laughing together in that hotel lobby was burned into my mind. "I don't know if I can," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I want to." Clara's sobs deepened, and I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. Upstairs, the sound of Jacob's video game buzzed faintly, a surreal reminder that life outside this room was still moving forward. But for Clara and me, everything felt like it was standing still. That night, I slept in the guest room, lying in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. I felt like a stranger in my own life. How had it come to this? How had the woman I'd loved for nearly 2 decades become someone I didn't even recognize? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? The next morning, Clara was up before me, the smell of coffee wafting through the house. I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours, and my head pounded with a dull ache. The events of the night before played on a loop in my mind, each detail sharpening my resolve. I needed answers, clear, undeniable truth. And if Clara wasn't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. I headed downstairs, my footsteps heavy on the hardwood. Clara was at the kitchen counter, her back to me, staring out the window with a mug in her hands. She didn't turn around when I entered, and for a moment, we both stood in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "Morning," I muttered, grabbing my own coffee. She nodded without looking at me. "Morning." I sat at the table, watching her. She looked tired, her eyes puffy from crying, her usually impeccable hair pulled into a loose bun. Despite everything, a pang of guilt tugged at me. But I buried it quickly. This wasn't my fault. She'd made her choices. "I want to see your phone," I said, breaking the silence. Clara froze, her grip tightening on the mug. "Why?" "Because I need to know everything," I said firmly. "No more half-truths. If you want me to even consider fixing this, I need the full story." She hesitated, her shoulders tense. "Alan, I already told you. You told me part of it." I interrupted. "If there's nothing else, you shouldn't have a problem showing me." She turned slowly, her expression a mix of defiance and resignation. Without a word, she set her mug down, grabbed her phone from the counter, and handed it to me. "Fine. Here." I unlocked it and immediately went to her messages. At first, it was the same mundane chatter I'd seen before. Conversations with friends, reminders from her gym, grocery lists. But then I found a thread labeled Simply M. The most recent messages were innocuous enough. "M, I hope you're okay. Call me if you need to talk. Clara, I can't. Not now." But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. There were confessions, flirtations, hints of something much deeper than Clara had let on. "M, you deserve to be happy, Clara. You deserve someone who sees you. Clara, I haven't felt this alive in years. Thank you for that. M, can't wait to see you again. Friday? Same place? Clara, yes. I'll make it work." The timestamps lined up perfectly with the nights she claimed to be out with friends. My stomach churned as I read each message, the words cutting deeper with every scroll. When I finally looked up, Clara was watching me, her arms crossed over her chest. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said quietly. "Then how was it supposed to happen?" I asked, my voice thick with anger. "Were you waiting for me to agree to your open marriage plan so you could parade this guy around guilt-free?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "Alan, I was confused. I thought maybe if we both had the chance to explore, it would make things better. But it's not about Marcus. It was never about him. Then what is it about?" I demanded, slamming the phone onto the table. "Because all I see is you lying to me. Over and over again." She flinched but didn't back down. "It's about us," she said, her voice breaking. "About how far apart we've drifted. About how lonely I've felt for years. You say I'm the one who lied, but you've been lying too. Pretending everything's fine when it's not." I stared at her, my anger warring with a flicker of guilt. Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe I had ignored the signs, buried myself in work, let the routines of life replace the passion we once had. But that didn't justify what she'd done. "I'm going to need some time," I said finally, standing up. "Time to figure out what I want. And you need to think about what you really want too." "Alan," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No more excuses, Clara," I said, my voice firm. "If there's anything else you're hiding, now's the time to come clean. Because once I walk out that door, I'm not coming back until I know the truth." She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then closed it, her expression crumbling into tears. I grabbed my keys and left, needing to get out of the suffocating house before I said something I couldn't take back. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind a chaotic storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, regret. They all swirled together, leaving me drained and directionless. By the time I pulled into a quiet park to sit and think, one thought kept repeating in my mind. The woman I'd trusted with my life was a stranger now, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to trust her again. Sitting in the car at the park, I stared at the dashboard, the soft glow of the clock ticking away the minutes. I felt adrift, the shock of Clara's betrayal mingling with the gnawing realization that I didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle. She claimed it wasn't about Marcus, but her messages to him told a different story. If I was going to confront this head-on, I needed to know everything. I pulled out my phone and did something I never thought I'd do. I called Veronica Bryson. She answered after the third ring. "Alan, this is unexpected." Her voice was cheerful, but there was a hint of wariness, as if she already knew why I was calling. "Veronica," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk. About Clara." There was a brief pause. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play dumb." I snapped, my patience already thin. "I know she's been leaning on you for advice. I know you're the one who planted the idea of an open marriage in her head. I just want to know how deep this goes." Veronica sighed, her cheery tone slipping away. "Alan, I think you're upset, and that's understandable. But if Clara wants to explore things, that's her choice. It's not about me or Greg." "Cut the crap," I said, my voice rising. "You've been coaching her. I saw the emails. If you know something I don't, now's the time to spill." Another pause, this one longer. When Veronica spoke again, her voice was lower, almost apologetic. "Look, Clara's been struggling for a while. She's been confiding in me about how disconnected she feels. And yes, I suggested opening the marriage as a way to rekindle things. But whatever's happening with Marcus, that's on her." "So you knew about him," I said flatly. "I suspected," Veronica admitted, "but I didn't encourage it. I told her to be honest with you, to have a conversation before taking any steps. That's all. Honest." I let out a bitter laugh. "She's been sneaking around for weeks, lying to my face. That's your idea of honesty?" "I'm sorry, Alan," she said softly. "I really am. But this isn't about me. It's about you and Clara. And if you want my advice, don't let your anger blind you. Figure out what you want before making any decisions." I ended the call without replying. Veronica's words only confirmed what I already suspected. Clara had been planning this for months, and I'd been too blind to see it. When I got home, the house was quiet. The kids were asleep, and Clara was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red and puffy. "Did you go see him?" I asked bluntly, not bothering with pleasantries. "No," she said, her voice hoarse. "I've been here, thinking. Thinking about what? How to spin this, so you come out looking like the victim." Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. "Alan, I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. But I swear, I was never going to leave you. Marcus was a mistake. A distraction." "A distraction?" I said, my voice rising. "Clara, you don't just distract yourself with another man. You don't send him flirty messages or meet him at a hotel if you're not planning something." She stood up, clutching the blanket like it was a shield. "I didn't sleep with him. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but it's the truth." "And I'm just supposed to believe you?" I said bitterly. "After all the lies?" She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. "Alan, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just please don't give up on us." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was salvageable, that the woman I'd fallen in love with was still somewhere inside her. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was Marcus. "I need space," I said finally. "I can't keep doing this." Her face fell, but she nodded. "Take as much time as you need." Without another word, I went upstairs and locked myself in the guest room. I knew I couldn't avoid her forever, but for now, I needed distance. I needed clarity. The next day, I decided to take things a step further. I called a private investigator. If Clara wasn't going to be completely honest with me, I'd find out the truth myself. "Mr. Lewis," the PI, a gruff man named Tomlin, said over the phone. "Just to be clear, you want me to look into her communications, movements, and interactions with this Marcus guy?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I want to know everything." "Understood," Tomlin replied. "I'll keep you updated." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of relief and dread. If Clara was still hiding something, I'd find it. And once I had the full picture, I'd finally be able to decide whether to fight for our marriage or walk away for good. The next few days passed in a blur. Clara and I avoided each other as much as possible, moving through the house like strangers. The tension was suffocating, and every time I looked at her, I wondered if I'd ever be able to see her the same way again. My only solace was the knowledge that Tomlin was out there, digging up the truth. On Wednesday evening, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "I've got something. Let's meet." The diner where we met was quiet, the hum of conversation blending with the clink of silverware and coffee cups. Tomlin was already seated in a corner booth, a leather briefcase on the table in front of him. He nodded as I approached, gesturing for me to sit. "Evening, Mr. Lewis," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I've got what you asked for." I slid into the booth, my heart pounding. "What did you find?" Tomlin opened the briefcase and pulled out a slim folder. He flipped it open, revealing a stack of photos and printed emails. "Your wife and Marcus have been in contact for about 4 months," he began. "It started innocently enough, messages on a relationship forum, like she said, but it escalated quickly." He handed me a photo of Clara and Marcus sitting together at a coffee shop, their heads close as they laughed at something on her phone. Another showed them walking into the boutique hotel downtown. My stomach turned as I flipped through the images, each one a punch to the gut. "They've met up 6 times in the past 2 months, Tomlin continued. "Mostly in public places, but the hotel visits are, well, they speak for themselves." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. "What about the messages? Anything I didn't already know?" Tomlin nodded, sliding a printout across the table. "These are the highlights. Some of them get pretty intimate." I skimmed the pages, my eyes catching on phrases that made my blood boil. "I can't stop thinking about you. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. Next time, I don't want to stop." I slammed the folder shut, unable to read anymore. "So they?" Tomlin hesitated. "I can't say for sure if they've slept together, but based on the tone of the messages and the time spent at the hotel, it's likely." I sat back, my chest heaving with suppressed rage. Clara had insisted nothing physical had happened, but the evidence painted a different picture. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tomlin leaned forward, his expression serious. "That's up to you, Mr. Lewis. I can keep digging if you want more, or you can take this to a lawyer. Either way, you've got enough to confront her with." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. "Thank you, Tomlin. I'll let you know if I need anything else." He stood, giving me a firm handshake before leaving me alone with the folder. I stared at it for a long time, the weight of its contents pressing down on me. When I got home, Clara was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up as I walked in, her face lighting up briefly before the tension returned. "You're home early," she said. "I met with someone," I replied, my voice cold. "A private investigator." Her knife paused mid-slice, her hand trembling slightly. You hired someone?" I dropped the folder onto the counter between us. "I had to, since you weren't giving me the whole truth." Clara stared at the folder like it was a snake poised to strike. "Alan and I." "Save it," I snapped. "I've seen the photos. Read the messages. Don't even try to lie to me again." Her eyes filled with tears as she set the knife down, her shoulders slumping. "I wasn't lying about everything," she said softly. "It didn't go as far as you think." "Did you sleep with him?" I demanded, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "No," she said firmly, meeting my gaze. "We kissed. A few times, but it never went beyond that." I couldn't. I wanted to believe her, but the evidence Tomlin had gathered made it nearly impossible. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? To this family?" "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I know I've broken your trust, and I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." "Right?" I laughed bitterly. "You think you could just apologize and everything will be fine? You didn't just break my trust, Clara. You shattered it." She sobbed openly now, her hands trembling as she reached for me. But I stepped back, shaking my head. "I need time to think," I said coldly. "And until I decide what to do, I want you to stay away from me." Clara nodded, her sobs racking her body as she collapsed onto a chair. I turned and walked away, my mind a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and uncertainty. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't sure if there was anything left to save. I spent the next few nights in the guest room, my sleep restless and plagued by flashes of Clara's betrayal. The house felt heavier with each passing day, the silence between us stretching wider and wider. Clara seemed to respect my request for space, but I couldn't ignore the occasional glance she cast in my direction, her eyes pleading for forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. On Thursday, I decided it was time to dig deeper into the materials Tomlin had provided. The truth wasn't just a singular event. It was a pattern, a web of decisions and lies that had led us to this point. I needed to untangle it, no matter how painful it might be. I sat at the dining table, the folder open in front of me. The emails and text messages were like breadcrumbs, each one leading me closer to the heart of Clara's affair. I found myself piecing together a timeline. Their first contact on the forum, the casual exchanges that slowly grew more personal, their first meeting at the coffee shop, and the eventual escalation to hotel rendezvous. But something caught my eye, a mention of a weekend trip Marcus had taken to Cape Cod. The dates aligned with a supposed girls' weekend Clara had taken with Veronica. My pulse quickened as I checked Clara's messages from that weekend. There it was, a brief exchange confirming Marcus's plans, followed by a single message from Clara. "I can't wait to see you there." I slammed the folder shut, my hands trembling. She'd lied to me again about where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing. My anger flared, hot and consuming. I grabbed my phone and dialed Tomlin. "Tomlin," he answered, his voice steady. "I need you to look into something else," I said, my voice tight with rage. "Did Marcus book a room at Cape Cod the same weekend Clara claimed to be with her friends?" "I'll get on it," he replied. "Give me a day." That evening, I sat across from Clara at the dinner table, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. The kids chatted about their day, oblivious to the storm brewing between us. Clara pushed her food around her plate, stealing glances at me. But I kept my focus on the kids, refusing to engage. After dinner, once the kids had gone upstairs, she finally spoke. "Alan, we can't keep living like this." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the counter. "Then tell me the truth, Clara. All of it. No more half-truths, no more excuses." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the folder still sitting on the table. "I've already told you. Cape Cod." I interrupted. "You said you were with Veronica. Were you?" Her face paled, and that was all the answer I needed. "Unbelievable," I said, laughing bitterly. "You went away with him. You spent an entire weekend with him while I was here, taking care of the kids, thinking everything was fine." "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, tears welling up in her eyes. "We stayed in separate rooms." "We didn't." "Stop lying to me," I roared, slamming my fist on the counter. "You expect me to believe that after everything else you've lied about?" Her tears spilled over, and she sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "I was trying to figure out what I wanted, what we needed. I never wanted it to go this far." "But it did," I said coldly. "And now you've destroyed everything." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Alan, please. I'll do anything to fix this. I love you. I love our family. I lost my way." I stared at her, the woman I'd loved for so many years, now a stranger to me. I wanted to believe her, to believe that this was a momentary lapse, that we could somehow find our way back to each other. But the weight of her lies was too much to bear. "We'll see what Tomlin finds," I said finally, turning to leave the room. "Until then, I don't want to hear another word from you." The next day, Tomlin called. "Marcus did book a room in Cape Cod the weekend," he confirmed. "Same hotel Clara stayed at. 2 rooms, side by side. But here's the kicker. There's no evidence they stayed in separate rooms. No key card records, no surveillance footage showing them going to their own rooms." I thanked him and hung up, my heart sinking. Clara's lies had become a fortress, each one building on the last until I couldn't see any way through. But now, armed with the truth, I was ready to confront her for the last time. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about my future and whether she would have any place in it. That evening, I waited until the kids were asleep before calling Clara into the living room. She hesitated at the threshold, clutching a throw pillow like it might shield her from what was coming. I gestured to the couch opposite me, and she reluctantly sat down, her expression wary. "I talked to Tomlin again," I said, my voice calm but cold. "He found proof that you were at Cape Cod with Marcus. Same hotel, adjacent rooms. No evidence you stayed in separate rooms like you claimed." Her face crumbled, and she let out a shaky breath. "Alan, No," I interrupted, holding up a hand. No more excuses, Clara. No more lies. I need the truth. All of it. Right now. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the clock ticking on the mantel. Then Clara exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping. You're right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been lying. About everything. The admission hit me like a sledgehammer, even though I'd been expecting it. Start talking, I said, my tone sharp. And don't leave anything out. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. It started 4 months ago on that forum, like I told you. I was lonely, Alan. I felt invisible. Marcus he was just someone to talk to at first. And then I pressed. And then it turned into more, she admitted, her voice trembling. We started texting, meeting for coffee. He made me seem like I mattered. But it wasn't love, Alan. It was a distraction. A stupid, selfish distraction. In Cape Cod, I demanded, my anger simmering just below the surface. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. We shared a room, she confessed. But it wasn't what you think. We talked, we kissed, but I couldn't go through with anything more. You expect me to believe that? I snapped. After all the lies you've told, you really think I'll take your word for it? I swear to you, Alan, she said, her voice breaking. I couldn't do it. I thought I wanted more, but being there with him made me realize what I'd been throwing away. I left early the next morning. I haven't seen him since. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But the damage had been done, and there was no undoing it. Do you even understand what you've done to this family? I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. To me? You didn't just betray me, Clara. You betrayed our kids, our life, everything we've built together. She sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking. I know, she whispered, and I hate myself for it. But I love you, Alan. I love you so much, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I stood, pacing the room as I tried to process her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow rebuild what we'd lost. But the other part of me, the part that had spent the last few weeks drowning in betrayal, wasn't sure I had it in me to forgive. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally, my voice raw. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. Clara looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. Please, Alan, just give me a chance. Let's go to therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us. I stared at her, my heart aching with the weight of her plea. For years, she had been my partner, my confidant, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But now, all I could see was the cracks in our foundation, the lies that had turned our marriage into a house of cards. I need time, I said finally. Time to figure out if there's anything left to save. She nodded, her sobs subsiding as she wiped her tears. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I'll wait as long as it takes. But as I turned and walked away, heading upstairs to the guest room once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that some things, once broken, could never truly be repaired. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the house, unsure of when, or if, I'd return. Clara's betrayal had shattered the life I thought I knew, and while she might have been ready to fight for us, I wasn't sure I had any fight left in me. As I drove away, the sun rising over the horizon, I realized that this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It might very well be the end of the story. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.